Welcome to Rob Paints Models. Today we're painting some Flashgitz. This is part 1 of 4. Today we'll be going over the Kaptin. Now all the Flashgitz are best painted in sub-assemblies because otherwise you just can't reach behind that gun to paint. So at the very least leave the snaz gun and the boss pole off. We're going to be priming the models black. And starting with Ork Flash for our skin tone. Just going to base coat all of the skin areas with this, not worrying about overspray. Now we're doing a zenithal highlight with Strachan green. We're only spraying this from above just to catch the upper surfaces. Next up is Ushabti Bone, another zenithal highlight. We're also going to hit the face a little bit from the front, anywhere where we want to really make everything pop. Now we're using Cadian Flesh Tone to hit areas like the mouth and the elbows, also the shoulders, anywhere where the skin's been drawn tight and we'd be able to see blood vessels near the surface. After all, orcs have red blood underneath their green skin, so anywhere it's going to be tight or we're going to have wounds, there's going to be a lot of blood circulation there, so we'll be able to see it through something translucent like skin. Now we're going to be painting a Thonian Camo Shade, which is a wash. Going to cover all of the skin areas with this, letting it sink into the recesses, making sure it doesn't pool on the flat surfaces. If it does pool, just use a wet brush to draw it off the model. The wash really picks out the muscle definition on these models. There you go, that's the skin all done. Now we're going to spray all of the leather and metal areas with dark grey blue. We're also going to hit up his pants, which we're going to paint white later. As you can see, I've masked off the areas I don't want to spray with some pink tack. Next we're painting the pants with Celestra Grey, our base coat for our white. Finally Ultron Grey, which we're just going to hit the knees and the tops of the legs with that. Now we're going to use Xerius Purple to base coat the back of the coat. Next up, use Demonette Hide to highlight the coat. Here I'm using some black just to push the shadows back in, because I overshot a little bit with the Demonette Hide. Now I'm using some Vallejo Game Color Violet ink. This is tinting what we've done previously. It's essentially treating the previous stages as a pre-shade. The violet ink is very thin and transparent but highly saturated, so it gives us a really strong purple colour. Here we go, we're done with the airbrush now, and I've base coated all of the black and metal parts with some Abaddon black. I decided not to show you that because it's boring. You know how to base coat. Here I am painting the leather areas with VMA Dark Grey. This is an airbrush paint, but you can apply it with a brush, it just requires a few more coats. Now we're going to highlight the leather areas with Fenrisian Grey. I'm using a kind of stippling edge highlight motion. This is a technique I use on all leather areas and most cloths in order to create scratches and damage on the surface. It works especially great on areas that are going to be shiny leather because the scratches on the glossy surface would really be very noticeable. Even if they're not sculpted into the model, these little glints will make the surface look uneven. Now we're going in with Ultron Grey, doing some more highlights, just the very corners and the sharpest areas of the black leather. Now I'm going to base coat all of the weathered metallic areas with Gun Grey. This is quite a dark metallic, but as it's a Vallejo Model Air paint, the pigment is very fine so you don't notice it. It is quite thin, so it tends to take 2 coats to cover fully. Now we're going to shade all of the metallic areas with non-oil. We're also going to use it on the black leather, just to try and reinforce the shadows in that area. Now we're going to paint the yellow shoulder pad. Avalon Sunset takes about 3 coats to cover fully over any colour. Make sure to use thin coats and let each coat dry fully before applying the next one, otherwise it will start to go rough as it lifts up the paint underneath it. This technique is also good for any bad moon symbols you might have. Now we're going to layer on some Irial Yellow. This is the real base colour for these yellow areas. It looks quite bright going on while it's wet, but as it dries it will go a lot more transparent, so you'll still need 2 to 3 thin coats of this. Now we're going to start blocking in some highlights with the Flashgitz Yellow. Trying to create a gradient up onto the top of the shoulder pad. see, it will take about 2 coats just to get the tone in, and then I start glazing in the Flash Gitz, moving from the bottom of the shoulder pad to the top in order to try and cover up the join between the 2 colours. Now we're going with a mix of Flashgitz Yellow and Ushabti Bone. Just blocking in some more of that gradient. Once that's blocked in, going back with Flashgitz Yellow and continuing to use glazes to ease the transition between the colours. Final highlight is with Ushabti Bone. It's just a small narrow band on the top of the shoulder pad. Yet again, going back in with glazes afterwards, just to hide the transition. If you left the shoulder pads off, you could do this with an airbrush much faster. So there we are, with the paint's dry, you can see the gradient starting to take shape. I'm going to use Screamer Pink, thinned down with some Lamian Medium to a very, very thin glaze consistency. And I'm going to use this moving from about a third of the way down the shoulder pad towards the bottom of the shoulder pad. Screamer Pink is a complementary colour to yellow, so it's very useful for shading the colour because it just kind of tints it back to orange without actually losing any of the saturation of the colour. If we'd used black or brown, then we would have lost some of the vibrancy of this, and these being Flash Gitz, we want them to be as bright as possible. Yeah, I'm going back in with some of the Aerial Yellow and the Flashgitz Yellow with thin glazes, just easing in the transition. There's a lot of back and forth in this process. Finally, going over all of the shoulder pad with Lamenter's Yellow. This just unifies everything, and much like with the violet ink on the coat, tints everything underneath it and treats it like a pre-shade. You can skip this step if you want to, but I really like how it looks. Now we're painting the white areas with Celestra Grey. This takes 2 to 3 coats to cover fully. Now we're using Ultron Grey, layering that up over the Celestra Grey. Ushabti Bone is used to edge highlight the yellow areas. If you prefer the clean look for your orcs, then you're done with this shoulder pad. If you want to weather them, create some paint chips and some rust, then the next stage is for you. Here we're going to use VMA Burnt Umber and a piece of old sponge. Dip the sponge in the paint. Remove most of the paint on a tissue and start dabbing it onto the areas you want to look all damaged. On bare metal it starts to look like really old rust. On painted areas it looks like there's a kind of brown primer underneath. I'm going to hit all of the metal areas that I've painted so far with this. It's a messy process, which is why we're doing it now, so that we can touch up afterwards. Next we're going to do the same with Scrag Brown, which is a more orange shade. This gives us the newer looking rust. Now using VMA Chrome, and we're going quite lightly with this. This is to represent areas that may have been sharpened or had the rust knocked off them through repeated use or contact with the world. On the sword I'm using a sweeping motion towards the edge of the blade to make it look like the captain's been sharpening his chopper. Now we're going to touch up all the areas on the coat with Xerius Purple. The weathering process is messy, so it's almost inevitable that you'll get some paint on it. If you leave the shoulder pads off, you're less likely to get paint on them. Going in here with violet ink, base coating the areas that I missed because of the masking. I'm also reinforcing the shade on the coat with this, going into the creases, which is harder to do with an airbrush. Much easier to do with a brush. Here I'm using a mix of violet ink and Xerius Purple just to make sure that all of the colours are uniform across the coat in the areas where I missed before. Hitting the tops of the shoulders to make sure that there's a highlight up there where the lights will be catching it. And now I'm using a plain Xerius Purple and we're painting the stripes on the pants. Painting stripes is actually easy so long as you don't fall into the trap. And the trap is that stripes don't look correct in real life. Which is to say, if you look at the butt of any stripy pants, the seams don't line up, the stripes don't line up. And if you try and make your stripes line up on the butt of any model you're painting, you will go crazy because it is geometrically impossible. It's important to think about how the way that the pants are constructed, and even if the sculptor hasn't given you a seam to follow, the seams will be there, and you just have to think about where they are. I always start painting stripes going down the middle of the knee, and then just try and keep them a uniform size as I go around. Here we're going to use some Ultron Grey to straighten up our stripes, neaten up any mistakes we've made. Also cover up any of the weathering that got on the pants as well. I'm using Demonette hide to edge highlight the coat. I'm also going to do the same trick and create little rips and tears along the edges of the coat by stippling the paint on. Here I'm using some more violet ink just to blend those damaged areas back into the rest of the coat. Here I'm using some Zerial purple to do some touch-ups. Next it's Ultron Grey and Demonette hide in about a 50-50 mix. This is our last highlight on the coat. Just using this to pick up any sharp edges and also reinforce the damaged areas. Next I'm going to apply some Seraphim Sepia wash over all of the pants. This is to make the white areas seem more grubby and dirty. Last stage on the pants is to use some Nuln oil to create shade. Now we're painting the lining of the coat with Screamer Pink. A steady hand and good brush control lets us create a seam line and make it look like the coat's actually been hemmed properly. Now we're going to use Pink Horror, and I'm going to block in where I want the highlights first, and then start using glazes to reinforce the transition from the Screamer Pink to the Pink Horror. Here I'm trying to reinforce the seam. Next we're using a 50-50 of Orphan Grey and Pink Horror. This is to create the shiny highlight that you would get along the edge of where the lining meets the leather. I'm also using this to edge highlight any of the exposed edges. Now I'm going with BMA Burnt Umber and base coating the brown leather areas. This will take 2 to 3 coats as it's quite thin and it's an airbrush paint. I'm also going to paint all of the teeth that are hanging from his belt and in his hat and on the end of his sword. Going to use Doom Bull Brown to highlight the leather areas. Now I'm creating scratches and other details with Ushabti bone. This isn't actually a highlight at this point, this is just creating damage and weathering along the edges of the leather. Now I'm going back in with BMA Burnt Umber. You can see how thin it is there. We're just using this to tint over what we've done previously. Finally going in with Ushabti bone, being very careful here with the tip of my brush. Also adding in a few more newer scratches while I'm doing this. Now I'm painting the inside of the mouth of Screamer pink. If you don't glue on the head, then you'll be able to paint the tongue and the inside of the mouth directly. I'm going to highlight that with Pink Horror. Finally, Cadian Flesh Tone, just right on the tip of the tongue there. Now I'm going to base coat all of the teeth in his mouth and the gums around the teeth with Burnt Umber. I'm touching up all of his skin with a mixture of Cadian flesh tone and Castellan green, concentrating on the area around the mouth and any areas that I may have hit with the weathering processes before. You can actually paint all of the skin with a brush using just Castellan green and Cadian flesh tone. Just base coat with Castellan green and then add more Cadian flesh tone and you'll get the exact same result as the airbrush method at the start of this video. It's just more time consuming and takes longer. I prefer to do the airbrush method, which is fast, and then go back in and neaten everything up with a brush. Here I'm just using pure Cadian flesh tone to reinforce the highlights around the mouth and the lips. Evil Sun Scarlet for the eyes. Rakarth Flesh for the teeth. Make sure to leave a little bit of that burnt umber showing around the base of the tooth. Now we're highlighting the teeth with Pallid Witch Flesh. I just use a little bit of Seraphim Sepia to age the older teeth that are hanging on the cord. Here I'm base coating the ends of his bandana with Celestra Grey. As this is quite a thin piece of material and it's not got anything behind it, we need to make it look slightly translucent as the light scatters through the material. So we're not going to be doing any harsh shading on this. Just layering in some Ulthran Grey on the bandana, only really hitting the uppermost surfaces or any areas where the light would be transiting through the material. Where the two surfaces overlap, less light would travel through the material there. Creating some shade with Fenrisian Grey. Again, I'm not using any blacks or dark greys for this. The blue gives the sense that light is passing through the material. use a small amount of Nuln oil, only on the gap where the two pieces of cloth overlap. Next up, it's Metal Colour Gold, which is technically an airbrush paint, but it paints very well with a paintbrush. We're just going to hit the trim of his at, and also some of his cyborg parts. This paint can take 2 coats to cover normally, but it still covers far better than any other gold that I've encountered. Here we're using Metal Colour Copper. We're just going to paint the hilt and the crossguard. We're also going to use it on some of his cyborg parts. As you can see, these paints cover very well over black. Now I'm going to paint the pistons with VMA Chrome. Lastly, base coating the rest of the hand with VMA Gun Grey. Here we're using some Agras shade. This is the gloss version. The advantage of this is it's got much lower surface tension, so it flows into the recesses much more easily than the normal one and won't tint the surface, which is great for doing metallics. Druchii Violet is used to add an oily effect to the pistons. Unfortunately, my camera ran out of storage space just as I was finishing off the bionic arm, so I lost that footage. After the Druchii Violet was dry, I used Nuln Oil to create some more shade, and then highlighted the rest of the hand with Gun Grey and then Chrome. If you are enjoying this series, then please like, share and subscribe, and leave a comment letting me know what you want to see in the future. There are links in the doobly-doo to all of the equipment I use, as well as to my Facebook page, Twitter and Instagram. And if this video helped you paint any of your orcs, then please tweet me some pictures, I'd love to see them. That's it, thanks for watching, bye.